Well, greetings and welcome to the program. You know, we started doing this stuff back in the 1980s. We will never have a perfectly accurate count of how many programs we've done because we don't have recordings from all the stuff back on the days before the internet when we were doing this on Saturday afternoons on radio stations, sometimes driving out to these musty, smelly radio studios out in the middle of nowhere to do the program that nobody was listening to on a Saturday. You know, they were just, the station was just happy to have somebody to do something, you know. And but we have lots and lots of them now on Sermon Audio, getting up around 3,000, I think, somewhere in that general vicinity. Been doing this a while. And who knows how long we'll keep going. I mentioned on Twitter just a few minutes ago that you ought to tune in to every program because eventually Rich Ryer is going to just keel over right during the program. And that'll be must-see TV. It really will. You'll want to be able to say, I was watching that day when it all came to a screeching halt. And gallows humor, folks. It's what happens when you get past a certain milestone in the years as they roll by. So, you know, I'm filling in at Apologia a good bit. I think I've done the last 3 weeks. I'm doing next week, and then I'm going to be gone for all of September, and we'll be doing Road Trip Dividing Lines. But last Lord's Day, before yesterday, I did a study of the Prologue of John that'll be directly relevant to the debate coming up in Tullahoma with Dale Tuggy on the Prologue of John, specifically John 1:1-18. And so when I sort of got the call to do this week, I'm not sure why I thought of doing this, but I decided to do the prologue of First John. And, you know, I wanted to give the folks some background information as far as how important it is, how useful it is that we break out of the mindset that we very often have in American modern Christianity, where we take the Bible and we break it up into parts, and very often the connections between the parts get lost. We don't see them. And our appreciation of the consistency of the text and the message of the text is impacted by that. It really is. And so, yeah, okay, yeah. And it's gone again. Well, I hope my truck's out there somewhere. I got no earthly idea since this open and it failed. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, Windows. What can I say? So, as I was looking at First John, there's, when you buy commentaries on these things, there'll be discussions about authorship and did John really write this? Was this the elder John? Oh, it just decided to come back. Hello. Oh, okay. And my truck's still there too. That's the important part. And yours isn't, but mine is not. Just kidding. That's why it disappeared. They blocked it, and Rich is minus one pretty truck. Anyway, as I was translating through it, because obviously, First John is almost always the first book you translate when you learn Greek. It's baby Greek. It's level 2 out of 10, I would say. And so if you want to encourage people to continue the study of Greek, you don't want to start them off in a really bad place. And So as I was reading through it, I was just struck by the purposeful connections between First John and John chapter 1, the Gospel of John and the Epistle of John. And I know the critical scholarship would say, well, that's what you'd expect a forger to do and blah, 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 blah. But what was fascinating to me is when you accept the Bible as the Word of God as a whole, we have further commentary on the meaning of the prologue of the Gospel of John, thanks to the Prologue of John. So let me give you some examples here. One of the things that I emphasized in my sermon a week ago, not yesterday, but a week ago, there were two things I wanted to communicate to everybody. I want everybody in the church to understand. The first was an insight that my dad shared with me one Christmas night somewhere around 1984-ish, I think. Maybe 83, probably 84, because I had started my Greek studies by that time in college. And my dad had gone to Moody Bible Institute, and he had studied under Dr. Kenneth Wiest. And when I first started showing an interest in theological things, he took me to Berean Christian Bookstore, and he bought 2 sets of books for me that I still have in my library to this day. One was A.T. Robertson's Word Pictures in the New Testament, and the other was Kenneth Wiest's, I think it was Word Studies in the New Testament, something like that. Robertson was brown and Wiest was black as far as the hardback covers go. And so by the light of the Christmas tree, after a wonderful turkey and dressing dinner, like my dad always provided for us, just the best in the world, he got out his old Greek New Testament, which I have. It's in my office. I should bring that in here. He got out his Nestle Aland, man, what was that, 23rd edition, I think, something like that. And I had the 27th edition, and, well, it might have been 26th back there, then, now I think about it. Anyway, and he walked through the Prologue of John and said, "Did you ever notice this?" And the issue was that when John speaks of the Logos, the Word, he uses the imperfect form of ein. So in the beginning was the Word. Now, an imperfect does not point to a point of origin. Does not point to a beginning. As far back as you push the beginning, the Word is already in existence. And the Word was proston theon, was with God. Again, eternal relationship. And the Word was God, as to his nature, deity, eternal, not something that starts in time. And as you walk through the prologue, as soon as he starts talking about the creation of other things, he uses a geneta. He uses the aorist form of another verb of being, but it's an aorist form. And it can refer to point of origin, in time, things like that. And he keeps this distinction all the way up to verse 14. And in verse 14, you have the incarnation. And the Word became, now he uses again geneta, became flesh. Why? Because the Word had not eternally been flesh. The Word entered into flesh at a point in time. This is the incarnation. And I'm so thankful to have that memory of that discussion on a Christmas night, many moons ago now, over 40 years ago, with my dad, who's gone to be with the Lord, and my mom, who went before my dad did. And so I shared that with the folks at Apologia, and said, I want you to remember this. And then the other thing I did is I talked about the bookends, how John 1:18 is the bookend of John 1:1, and how the two verses help to interpret each other. And that was the author's intention. And answer many of the key questions in regards to the meaning of the prologue. And so yesterday, as I began speaking, and of course as I prepared, I was struck by the fact that the prologue of First John evidently assumes you've already read the gospel. And it provides insight into the meaning of the Gospel of John as well. So, for example, in 1 John 1:1, what was from the beginning, ha ein ap arches. Now, of course, an arche ein ha logos, John 1:1. Here's arches in 1 John 1:1. And what's the verb? Ein, the imperfect form of I me. What was from the beginning, not what was created at the beginning, but what was from the beginning, which we have heard. So what was from the beginning has entered into our experience so that we can hear what we have seen with our eyes, what we have gazed upon, and that's the same word that he uses, as I recall, in John 1:14. We beheld his glory. Same word. And our hands handled, touched, concerning to logo tes zoes, the word of life. Logos. Hopefully, you don't have the same level of Greek background that Joe Ventilacion had, and you can recognize that in Greek, logos, nominative form, logo, genitive, singular form, they're not different words, they're just different forms of the word depending on how they're functioning in the sentence. Remember, ton theon, ton theon. Ton theon. Yeah, that was a great night. Anyway, concerning the word of life, and the life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness. And again, martyreo, to bear witness, doesn't mean necessarily give your life. It means to testify. Is again used, this is John. John testified concerning Jesus. Same terminology is being used. And then it says, and proclaiming to you the eternal life, which ein was pros ton patera. What is John 1:1? The second phrase, kai halagos ein pros ton theon, is with God. And the assertion, finally got around to that. I was sitting here going, is he ever going to put this up? I put it up here. I made the font big. I did the whole 9 yards. But, I assumed that he was off talking in the chat channel, doing whatever, it's just how it works, Anyway, and we are proclaiming to you the eternal life, which was, there's your ein, again, the same eternal form used in the prologue, which was pros ton patera, which is with the Father, was pros ton theon in John chapter 1, but we know that that's what he intends in John 1:1 because of John 1:18, and then when you allow 1 John to be a commentary as well, now you have further evidence of the fact that the God with whom the Word was in John 1:1 is the Father. So you have one who has eternally existed, and arche ein ha logos, in the beginning was the Word, and Word was with God, that is, the Logos is with the Father, John 1:18, 1 John 1:2 identifies him as the Father. And the Word was as to his nature, deity. And then back to 1 John, and was manifested to us, John 1:14. So it's so clear that the author of 1 John is not only assuming that his audience has the gospel, but he's purposefully connecting this epistle at the very beginning with that gospel as well. And if we, and I know the way that we have translated the Bible and formatted the Bible and things like that, it creates this, I can memorize this verse here and this verse here, and it sort of breaks stuff up. And the idea of looking for the themes and the connections and the language and the use of verbal forms and things like that can seem somewhat daunting or maybe irrelevant. And very often when we preach the text, those of us who are ministers who preach the text, we don't explain these things. I certainly tried last night myself to do that, and noticed, as normal, the clock in the back of the church we rent is too small for me to see very well. And so, and I don't like tapping on my phone or running a clock or something like that. No matter how it feels to me, it always ends up being right at an hour. It's just what it is. I'm not sure how that is working that way. But anyways, I wanted to show that to you. There's so much of that in the New Testament and Paul and things like that, that this type of analysis, these things, seeing those connections, I think is important and helpful to people. So anyways, you can, even though we didn't have it up very long, you can take that down. I almost said something about that. He's busy with whatever he's doing over in the other room, which is not listening to me, but hey, don't worry about it. Yeah. Sure. Let me see. Okay. Now, I had this tweet, and I wish it was clearer as to exactly when these things. Okay. It looks like August 5th. Wow, it's been there this long? All right. I bookmarked this tweet from a Roman Catholic by the name of Mr. Casey, at Mr. Casey 62. I'm not sure what 62 means. Maybe it means date of birth. If so, then we're same age. It doesn't look that way to me. But anyway. And I thought, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think it would be useful to folks to just sort of walk through something like this, because this is the kind of claim that you see all the time, and historically and biblically aware Protestants used to be prepared for this kind of stuff, but we don't talk about much in our churches any longer. And so just want to run through it. I wish there was a way to. Yeah, there really isn't. So he's responding to someone that I think I follow, Sola Chad. It said, "Who tricked Catholics into believing that Peter is the rock?" Okay, so he's responding to that as a traditionalist Catholic. And here's what he says. Who tricked Protestants? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, since this is all going to be talking about this, I'm going to put it up there so that when we get to it, we can, in fact, I'll just go ahead and, okay. Who tricked Protestants into ignoring every piece of evidence that proves Peter is the rock? Every piece of evidence. Rich finally got to use his camera over here. You'll notice he just said, "Can you hear the teacher from?"
I call that the Edward R. Murrow angle.
Okay,
It's my favorite shot.
Yeah, it's and it is my least favorite. In fact, I hate it. So that's why it's his favorite, and that's just how life goes at Alpha and Omega Ministries. After we've been working in the same thing for how long has it been? When did the 30? How many years? 38 years. Okay. See. All right. I am looking over here, so I mean, I suppose that. All right. 15 reasons why we know he is. Peter is the rock. Now, it's fascinating to me. A person who would go back and listen to the third debate that I did in January of 1990. No, December of 1990 at City of the Lord in Tempe, Arizona. Debated the papacy. Would find a lot of this stuff addressed there. And certainly, just a few years later, when we did a over 7-hour 2-night debate in Denver on the papacy, all of this stuff is fully addressed. This traditionalist Catholic doesn't seem to have any idea what any of the problems with this are. When you live in an echo chamber, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to be aware of what's outside of that. And look, there are Protestants that do the exact same thing. I get it. I'm not saying that it's great for anybody, but here it is. All right, 15 reasons why we know he is. Jesus and the apostles spoke Aramaic to each other, not Greek. How do you know that? I mean, do you know what was said in Greek, what was said in Aramaic, and what might have been said in Hebrew? How do you know what level of proficiency any of the apostles would have had in Greek? I mean, you can assume that Jesus didn't speak Greek. I'm not sure what he was speaking to Pilate in. I doubt Pilate was proficient in Aramaic, having been sent there from Rome. So that's all speculation. And remember, the Matthew 16:18 claim, the Petrine Promise, which is in the cupola of the Vatican, in gold. You look up, and it's in Latin, but it's around the cupola up there. I saw it. And it's in gold. I'm not talking gold leaf. We're talking, it's in gold. Without it, you have no papacy. Even with it, you don't have a papacy, for that matter. But without it, it's done. This is the central text. And there are so many problems with the Roman Catholic interpretation of this text that, as I pointed out in the debate in 1993, you take each of these issues, and let's say there's a 50-50 chance that the Roman Catholic view is right on this issue. And then, but that's dependent for this next issue, and there's a 50-50 chance that once you put the whole line together, there's like a 3% chance that the Roman Catholic claim is true. Because you just have so many, it might be this, might be that, then it might be this, might be that, might be this, so on and so forth, all the way down the line. So you're going to see that despite the boldness of this fellow's claims, it doesn't pan out. Jesus and the apostles spoke Aramaic to each other, not Greek. I would assume in most instances that would be true. But what facility do they have in any of the languages? We don't know. Next, the Aramaic word for rock is kepha. Well, again, 1993, I presented the argumentation, Chris Karagunis' scholarly article, that in that context, the better Aramaic term was minra. There's more than one word for rock in Aramaic. And you have no idea, because we have no Aramaic original for Matthew. He's going to make the claim. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you got nothing. So you're assuming. You just assume what the Aramaic word would have been when you don't know. So the ultimate authority of the Petrine Promise is, again, based upon speculation about languages we have no original sources for. Fascinating. Now, Kepha is, and I think part of what the guy is responding to here is a less than sterling argument that Protestants frequently use, because they note the difference between Kepha and Kephas. That's not really relevant. Just as I was saying, I hadn't really thought about this when we were looking at First John and logu, logos, different forms in the Greek language. But I think that's the main thing the guy has in the back of his mind is, Kephas, that's Peter, but Kepha means a big rock or something like that. Well, we could argue that, and he's going to spend a lot of time, not going to spend much time refuting it because it's not relevant. But that's where it's coming from. So he says, so Jesus actually said, you are Kepha, and upon this Kepha I will build my church. He doesn't know that. Pure speculation. How do you know he didn't say Minra? And the most important thing is, as was pointed out long ago, but Roman Catholics don't read criticisms outside Roman Catholicism, just like most Protestants don't read Roman Catholic stuff. The fact of the matter is that the real issue here is why, right here, in Matthew 16:18, and I say to you that su I Petros, you are Peter, kai epi taute te Petra, okadameso mu tein ecclesian, kai pulai hadu u kataskususen autes. So, and upon this rock, this. Why? Why doesn't he say it upon you? Why? And upon this rock, I will build my church. That's, if you're talking to the person you're identifying, that's not how you speak. And you can sit here and pretend, well, that wouldn't have been in the Aramaic. You don't know what the Aramaic was. You don't know it was in Aramaic. There is no Aramaic of Matthew. He's going to make that claim later on. But the point is, this is the issue that he never even acknowledges. Never even acknowledges. And this has been part of not only Protestant, but Old Catholic criticisms of pre-Vatican I papal authority claims and things like that. It's nothing new, but the problem with the internet is you can take arguments that have been refuted many times in the past, and as long as you repeat them enough times on social media, they sound good. You'll convince somebody. So then he says, you know that because when Peter is referred to by his actual name in the New Testament, he's called Cephas. He gives a number of different places where that is. Yes, he is called Cephas. There's no question about that. That Peter, Petros, and Cephas are interchangeable, but that doesn't mean you know what term Jesus used, because he uses taute. That's the problem. If he was trying to make the play on words, he did it in the most obtuse way possible. So it's highly probable that we're missing something by trying to push that alleged identification, as we'll see. Next point, Matthew's gospel was originally written in Aramaic. See Saints Papias and Irenaeus, 2nd century, and Eusebius' history. Oh, so we'll just simply, hey, they mentioned Aramaic Matthew. Yeah, they did. We don't have it. We don't have it. And there have been extensive papers written, so on and so forth. What is very obvious is the Matthew we have today was not originally written in Aramaic. It was written in Greek. So you have to pretend that the Matthew we have is not the original work of Matthew. And you don't know who translated it. And so you have a derivative work that's in the canon of Scripture. And by the way, before you go, yeah, but we're the church, we can define who says what. I don't think there's a single member of the Papal Biblical Commission today that believes that Matthew wrote Matthew. So don't give me that. Catholic Answers used to do that. Back in the olden days, back in the Patrick Madrid, Carl Keating olden days, how do you know Matthew wrote Matthew? And maybe they just didn't know back then that since Vatican II especially, Rome doesn't know who wrote Matthew. And Rome believes that it's a pseudonymous work. Somebody else wrote it, not Matthew. So to then say Matthew's gospel is written in Aramaic, you don't know that. Yes, there are references to a Aramaic Matthew, but that doesn't mean it was the gospel of Matthew. We don't have it. We can't check it. Therefore, anything you're doing here is pure speculation. And you're going to tell me this is the ultimate authority for the Christian today? You don't accept this kind of speculative argumentation and you got nothing? This is the sand foundation upon which the papacy is built. It truly is. Then he says, when Matthew's gospel is translated into Greek, by whom, when, we don't know, and somehow the Aramaic disappeared, we can't find it, don't know, the translator knew some Greek readers might not know the word kepha meant rock, so to make the rock image clear, he used the Greek word for rock, Petra. Upon this Petra I will build my church. Well, how do you know who did the translation? Did you talk to them? Did they leave anything behind whereby you can discern this? Or are you just simply mind reading someone from 2,000 years ago? Evidently, that's what you're doing. Because you're ignoring, again, the fact that this translator, whoever it was, said, taute, epi taute te Petra, upon this rock. Not upon you. He had just said, and I say to you, soy, first person singular. Second person singular, sorry. I say to you, soy, that su I Petros, you are Peter, kai epi taute. That's something else. That's the only way that language can be understood. It's referring to something else. And if you just do what Roman Catholics normally do and maybe look at some early church fathers, you'd find many of them who will say this is based upon the confession of faith that Peter had just enunciated, that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's what they believed. And they weren't, were they early Protestants? You're not going to say that now, are you? Probably not. So, upon this Petra, I will build my church. Again, ignoring, he puts the word this, he just never seems to recognize that he needs to explain why you go from you, second person, to taute, third person. Doesn't even know the issue exists. The vast majority of Roman Catholics don't. Vast majority of them don't. Petra is feminine, Peter is a man, so Matthew had to take Petra and masculinize it to Petros. He has to use Petra for rock, so his Greek readers will understand the concept. He can't use the feminine Petra for Peter's name. Again, now this is why I say he seems to be primarily arguing against the Petros-Petra thing, which is what I heard when I was a kid. When I was young, that was... And so there's nothing wrong with pointing out that that's not the strongest argument on the planet. He says, the claim that Petra means rock, but Petros means stone was true in Attic Greek, but never in Koine Greek, the Greek of the New Testament, entirely different dialect. That's way overstating it. In Koine Greek, both Petra and Petros meant rock. See fourth and fifth tweets. Well, that's not my argument, and so I'm not going to spend any time pulling out the TLG stuff and looking for every use of Petra or Petros in Greek literature in the ancient world. Not my point, not the issue. And And by Jesus' time, any distinction between Petra and Petros had ceased to even exist in Attic Greek. That's probably an overstatement, but between the 8th and 4th centuries BC, they were used as rock and stone in Attic Greek poetry, but that distinction had long disappeared by the time Matthew was translated into Greek. Koine Greek having become more popular in the 4th century BC and continuing in widespread use until the 5th century AD, even though, obviously, over that 1,000-year period, there would be some who would not necessarily identify all of that as Koine Greek. So let's say Petra and Petros are synonymous. It's not relevant to this particular argument. If Matthew had wanted Peter to mean stone, not rock, he would have used the Greek word for stone, lithos, or even clearer, cephos, which means small stone. Okay, maybe so. But again, did you see what you just did? You don't have a translator doing this anymore. You're talking about Greek, but you said this is all written in Aramaic. So you don't mean Matthew. You mean the translator, who is an uninspired person you don't know. Maybe you just didn't even notice that, but I find it rather interesting. Here, Jesus uses the second person personal pronoun you, singular, 7 times in these 3 verses. The context is clearly one of communicating a unique authority to Peter here and to Peter alone. Again, common error, which demonstrates that this individual is in an echo chamber, is only reading Roman Catholic material, and has never read anything that comes from the other side, which is the same thing with almost every Protestant in reverse. But yes, and I say to you, you are Peter. Those are second person singulars, as we pointed out when we read it. But, and upon this rock is not second person singular. It's third person. The pronoun, demonstrative pronoun, which is put in the feminine to match Petra, by the way, does not make sense if the continued direction is Peter himself. But please note, and I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Verse 19. Doso soi, I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. What is doso? If this long post that he made, maybe he cut and pasted it from something else, I don't know. But if this long post is going to have any meaning to it, he says, communicating a unique authority to Peter here and to Peter alone. Okay? So I'll ask the same question that I've been asking for a number of decades now. What is doso? Well, doso is a standard verb, didomi, to give. But why is it doso? Because it's future tense. I will give to you. Not I am giving. That's how it's almost always interpreted by Roman Catholic advocates, is that it's not a future, it's a present. It's not. I will give. So, yeah, right there, now that Rich caught up with me. I will give, right there. Doso, to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So, when did that happen? It didn't happen here. Even though the guy says that he is communicating unique authority to Peter here, and to Peter alone. But it's in the future. When did it happen? Well, the only 2 answers are Matthew doesn't record it for us, or it happens in Matthew chapter 18. But you can't say Matthew chapter 18 because at that point it's to all the apostles together, not to Peter alone. And down through church history, of course, there were all sorts of different views of these things, and the primary people initially pushing certain interpretations of Matthew chapter 16 happened to be in Rome for some strange, odd reason. And people outside of Rome had very different understandings of these things. But you can't, there have been those who would have seen Matthew 18 as the fulfillment. But you can't do it anymore because of theological development within Roman Catholicism, and especially after Vatican I. And the infallibility of the Pope, absolute supremacy of the Pope. Remember, again, this is church history stuff, but there was a time when there were three popes busily anathematizing each other. It was right after the Babylonian captivity of the church, where you have the Avignon papacy in Rome. The papacy in Rome had left Rome and went to Avignon, and then another group reestablished authority in Rome, or claimed to anyways, and they're busily anathematizing each other. And then a council appointed a new pope, deposed the other two, but they refused to go, so now you got three popes. And so it was the Council of Constance that finally rescued the papacy, because the papacy could not rescue itself. And so there was a brief opening there. This is in the 15th century, early 15th century. There's a brief opening there for what's called conciliarism. The idea of having councils as the ultimate authority. But the papacy shut that down real fast. And especially after Vatican I in 1870, there's no way that can rise from the dead, shall we say, and become the way things would be done, unless you're going to go, well, okay, so we were wrong back then, so much for papal infallibility, that type of thing. So, when is this? Either it's not recorded, which is highly strange, or if it is, it actually contradicts Roman Catholic teaching. But this guy doesn't even seem to know on it. Doesn't even seem to know that that's there. Doesn't even seem to go, oh, what future? I hadn't really thought about that. So insisting on stone versus rock, and again, that's not the issue, is asserting that Jesus said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, my Father who is in heaven. I tell you, you are an insignificant stone, and on the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." So what Jesus is actually doing is giving Peter, the man, not his faith, not his confession, a threefold blessing. Now, notice what he said there. The man, not his faith, not his confession. There are many in the early church that recognize that the confession of Jesus Christ as the Messiah, the Son of God, is the cornerstone of the Christian church. And that's why the gates of Hades will not prevail against the church. And by the way, that language is offensive language. Gates are defensive. So what that means is the church will be victorious over the realm of death. So it says, "Blessed are you, upon this rock I will build, I will give you unto you the keys." So he doesn't deal with the third person. He doesn't deal with the future tense. So he's just running stuff together, creating his own little narrative. What he is not doing is blessing him, then undermining his authority, then blessing him again. I guess undermining his authority be, "Upon this rock I will build." That tells you something about this man's view of the papacy. That the confession of Jesus as Messiah and Son of God is insufficient. You've got to have Peter as the rock. That tells you something. The rock obviously cannot be Christ because he's the builder. Well, that's like saying the sacrifice obviously can't be Christ because he's the priest that offers it. Oh, wait, he's both, isn't he? Yeah, careful about that kind of argumentation. Christ, rather, is the wise man who built his house upon the rock, the builder, the cornerstone, the foundation of the faith, but Peter is his foundation for the church. That's just pure faith. That's not what the text is saying. That's just pure faith in his part. And you know that because, looking at the grammar, with "you are Kepha," and upon this Kepha, now he capitalizes all of this. This Kepha must refer back to the closest noun. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Where did you get that? And by the way, I thought this was in Aramaic. How would you know? Oh, well, to say this Kepha refers to Jesus or to Peter's confession 3 verses earlier is to completely ignore the sentence's structure. No, you are completely ignoring the sentence's structure. You are not answering why you go from second person singular to a third person demonstrative pronoun. That's your problem. You're just not even aware of it. You've never been challenged on it. He didn't say you are Kepha, but upon this other Kepha I will build my church. No. As I asserted very strongly in the debate at Denver Seminary long ago, the focus in this text is always on Jesus. And any interpretation that changes that to, for example, Peter, who is about to be called Satan immediately after this, is a misinterpretation of the text. Misinterpretation of the text. So, there you go. Okay. Wanted to cover that one. Had that one in the bookmarks there for a while. And finally got around to it. Now, back to, in the last 15 minutes or so that we have on the program today, wanted to get back to, I think it was yesterday, I couldn't help, honestly, but to even, I had to comment on X. Let me see if I can find this here. It was, man, I reposted that one thing about someone predicting the rapture again, and my feed has been absolutely filled. There is a David Allen posted from the conclusion of my Liberating Romans from Reformed Captivity, which again is just such a bad book. It's just horrible. There are a couple of people he quotes that are truly problematic, but one of them, he said, David Bentley Hart's verdict on Augustine and his Reformed errors is both severe and salient. And I went, David Bentley Hart? Seriously? The pseudo-Orthodox guy? The Universalist? You're quoting David Bentley Hart as if this is relevant? You can't find better sources than this? It seems like, hey, as long as you can throw it and it sticks to the wall, David Allen's going to quote it. I mean, wow. Okay. I'm sure we could find some fascinating stuff that David Bentley Hart has said about things similar to David Allen's theology, too, because David Bentley Hart says a lot of really odd things. So, anyway, I wanted to get to the... why'd that change the font size? I don't know. We're trying to get to where... Yeah, thank you. We're trying to get to where David Allen's actually dealing with Romans chapter 8 to once again demonstrate that exegesis is not the forte of this book at all. So, but before we get there, right before we get there, we have another Ken Wilson citation. Woohoo! Again, use of sources. Ken Wilson likewise was critical of Augustine's construal of the human will. Oh, you want to put that up too, huh? Okay, fine. Augustine remained too committed to his systematic theology, demanding a damnably corrupted evil willer to entertain any notion of a neutral will in humans. So let me just stop right there. Neutral will in humans? Where on earth can you get that from the Bible? I mean, have you read Jeremiah recently? We don't even have to go to the New Testament. You read Jeremiah recently? You know, something about the leopard spots and the Ethiopian and his skin, and maybe Proverbs. How about Nebuchadnezzar? Yeah, I mean, there's just so much in the Old Testament. And then it's just so explicitly said that man is dead in sin. And that does not, and it's not that means there's no response. No, the response is always negative. The response is rebellion. Inability to do what is good in God's sight. This is the plain, direct, indisputable teaching of the text. And is Ken Wilson criticizing him for that? Sounds like it. Precisely because this evil willer could only choose evil without God, no neutrality. That's right. God must infuse salvific initial faith as a gift. How about God must raise by grace the recipient of his grace to spiritual life and give to that individual everything that is needed for life and godliness, which would include repentance and faith initially via the power of the Holy Spirit of God, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. How about that? How about we use New Testament? There's plenty of New Testament stuff. We don't need to use this other stuff. Following his current Stoic and prior Neoplatonic and Gnostic Manichaean views. It's just... wow. Balderdash. Okay? It's just... The level of absurdity is difficult to comprehend. And again, this is why you'll never find Ken Wilson willing to debate this stuff based on the Bible. Never do it. Never do it. Won't do it. Just watch. David Allen won't do it. Ken Wilson won't do it. They won't do it. Can't do it. Because all this Manichaean stuff. Okay. So finally, here we get to Romans 8:28-30. Election and predestination. Romans 8:28-30 serves as a foundational text for Reformed theologians who argue for the doctrines of predestination and unconditional election. John Piper, for example, referred to Romans 8:28-30 as the most important text of all in relation to the teaching of unconditional election. This passage is often described as the golden chain, outlining what is known as the Ordo Salutis, a logical and chronological sequence of events in salvation that underscores God's absolute sovereignty, leaving no room for human agency. Well, it contains, and I would say Romans 8:28 through 34-35, actually. This is an artificial limitation. But at the same time, the golden chain is not exhaustive of the Ordo Salutis by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know of anybody who claims that it is exhaustive of the Ordo Salutis. So again, strange stuff from David Allen doesn't use our language. Okay, same reason that Leighton Flowers doesn't either. But Leighton Flowers claims to have once been a Calvinist and still doesn't use our language. That's a problem. Oops. Go back. Thank you. However, there is strong exegetical basis for challenging the Reformed reading of Romans 8:28-30. Well, let's see if we can see some exegesis. See if there's actually some exegesis out there, or if we just get a bunch of quotations of various people from every perspective under the sun, rather than, okay, here's what it positively actually says. Because we can do that. We've done that in this very studio for years. Hours of it on this text in response to David Allen. A pivotal contribution to this discussion is Aaron Sherwood's Romans, a structural, thematic, and exegetical commentary, a nearly 950-page work. Oh my goodness. Utilizing discourse analysis to examine the structure and semantics of Paul's letter. Is that Allen's way of saying, I ain't doing this, I'm going to have somebody else do it? Anyway, Romans 8 specifically highlights the divine initiative, accomplishment, and consummation of salvation for all believers. Please note that the argument has already begun. This has a specific meaning for David Allen. All that Romans 8 is talking about is what God will do in response to man's faith. That's what it's all about. This is the issue with provisionism. This is the fundamental issue. And that is, well, since Paul's already talked about faith in Romans 3 and 4 and 5, and, then he can't go back and talk about eternal stuff. He can't talk about foundational issues now. So since he's talked about faith in the past, and here in Romans 8, he has said that those who are according to the flesh can't do what's pleasing to God, and all that kind of stuff. But look, no. Romans 8 specifically highlights the divine initiative, accomplishment, and consummation of consummation, not the beginning, but the consummation of salvation for all believers. But has nothing to do with who's going to be a believer. This is the beginning assumption, and it's going to then be used as the mechanism to get around when the text specifically makes reference to God's sovereign election unto salvation. Because if you say that someone is going to be conformed to the image of Christ, that requires all of salvation. What they're saying is, oh, no. All this is talking about is that once you become a believer, and once you, by your free will, accept God's free gift, why everybody else doesn't do it, we don't know, but it doesn't make you better, but your choice meets. So once you demonstrate that you're a prime rib, then this is the promise of God that he's going to do this for you because you're a believer. That's what you got. Then we had one of the first things I pointed out in response to this. This point is recognized by Arminians and Calvinists alike. Yet, as Moo correctly cautioned, this does not entail any minimizing of the importance of the human response of faith that has received so much attention in chapters 1 through 4. That is a misuse of Moo. That is a correct quotation. But we provided, when this book first came out, it's the first thing I ran into. And someone pointed out, it's the exact same quote that we dealt with years ago when he misused it then too. And that's one of the reasons he won't debate. He can't defend this stuff. We've been exposing these errors for years. He just keeps repeating them. It's just never ending. But we provided the whole quotation from Moo. And that quotation does not support this utilization. So he's taking a quotation where Moo is going to specifically talk about the sovereignty of God, all the rest is, and because in his mindset, believing is what drives everything, not God's choice. Again, provisionism starts with man, reason up to God. Bible starts with God, down to man. That's why provisionism is a misleading and destructive perspective. Moo doesn't take that perspective, but Allen does. And that's the problem. Yeah. Look at that. Look at that clock. I don't have the time here to try to find my response. Maybe, and again, just my apologies, but I'm preaching. The trip's coming up. I think I actually pick up the unit next week. I've got all the packing for that. Speaking at 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 or 6 churches on this trip. It's 5,000 miles of driving. So I've got a few other things going on, including a debate with Dale Tuggy, a dialogue with a progressivist. Got a few other things going on that somewhat limits the amount of time that I can put into tracking down stuff that we documented years ago and that David Allen has ignored all along. So, there you go. But I'll try before the next program to pull up that quote so we can provide that before we move on to the rest of the citation here. But we will pick up with that on the flip-flop, which I'm not sure when that's going to be. I'm thinking Wednesday. We'll see. We'll see how it all works out. Got a bunch of stuff going on this week, and then, like I said, once the trip starts, you just got to watch the app to know when we're going to be getting together. So, all right, I appreciate you listening. We covered a lot of, you know what? I'll have to admit, a lot of technical stuff today. Okay, we were talking technical stuff in John and First John. technical stuff regarding the Petrine Promise, allegedly, in Matthew 16. Same type of stuff here. Some of you geeks, that's what you love. I get it. If you're not one of the super geeks, I apologize. Sometimes we just got to deal with what you got to deal with, and that's how you do things. Okay? All right. Thanks for watching the program today. I do need to just mention, got a trip coming up, and diesel fuel has not gotten any cheaper. It was going down a little bit when Trump took over, but it's sort of snuck back up a little bit as far as costs is concerned. And so we need your support and to be able to continue to do this and the trips and everything else. So we appreciate that. Let you know about that. Leave that to God's people. We'll see you next time. God bless.